Welcome to On Point with Ellen Whippy-Knight, where we talk to inspirational Fijians wherever they may be. Controversy follows success, and not everyone can navigate life's challenges. Tonight, we talk to a woman who has not only been crucified and vilified in the public arena, but has come out on top of it. Former journalist, public relations expert, and now heading for a career in law, Sainiana Radrodro. And good evening to you, Sainiana.
Good evening, Ellen.
Now, that is some kind of intro, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But you live up to it. You know, I first had this conversation with you about our chat tonight, and you said a very interesting thing to me, first of all. You said, I'm very proud of where I am because I actually did not finish high school, and you were a mother at a very young age. But, you know, so were many other people. I would like to ask you, how did you do it, getting to where you are now? Where did you start?
I gave birth at 17. I obviously, as I shared, did not complete Form 6. But I had an inspirational father. My parents separated when I was only 11. And so from then on, it was dad, basically. Here in Fiji, mom lived in Australia.
Right.
And I got myself quickly back on track because my father believed in me and actually paid after I gave birth. At that time, there was nothing like what we have now, TELS and etc. So he paid through his FNPF to get me back to school. So I did preliminary studies through USP and managed to get myself back on track with education. And from then on, I never looked back.
That's great. But then you became a journalist.
Yes.
You were working at the Fiji Times. What prompted you to go into journalism?
Well, I started off, literally, I started off as someone working for a hotel in Suva. I did not have any qualifications. I needed to support my son. So I went into this hotel, walked in and asked for a job. I was given a job for a month making beds and cleaning rooms. This is after coming out of ACS. But then I said to myself at that point, I'm going to make myself, into something better. After a month, I wasn't paid, so I left. My second job was washing dishes at a restaurant in Suva.
How old were you then?
I was 18 by then.
And you were doing that to get a job, or were you doing it because you wanted to help pay for your school fees?
I definitely needed to support my son at that time. It was when I was 18, when I was already at the Fiji Times, that Dad agreed that I needed to go back to school. But like I said, I went into washing dishes, and then one day I decided I'm going to think about my life. So I realized I have always loved writing. When I was at ACS, everyone that knew me knew that we at ACS are into these fun things. We write to boyfriends and pen pals and etc. So I would write on behalf of all these girls to their boyfriends.
Oh, right, so you got some really good practice there.
Yes, and so that's how I first realized that I have a talent for writing. I walked into the Fiji Times, asked for an appointment with the editor, convinced him, I was 18, convinced him that I needed a job for my son to be able to support him. So he said, let me throw you right into the fire. Gave me a piece that I needed to go and test on that day. My first job was covering World Water Day at the Sukona Park in Suva. Came back, wrote the piece. I was hired the same day. I never looked back.
And who was the editor at the time?
Rory Gibson. I'll never forget him.
Oh, that
was an Australian.
Everybody deserves a break. Being a journalist really is some of the basic need to become a good PR, public relations. And then you went into public relations.
Yes, I did. I decided to shift away from journalism. So my first job was into the UN as communications specialist. This was after I was Chief of Staff of the Daily Post. And from then on, from the UN, I decided to go into Fiji Trade and Investment Bureau at the time. From FTIB, I joined the government, obviously, as a spokesperson for Ministry of Works and Transport at the time.
Right. And so how has your career moved from being a journalist into PR? You actually represent quite a few, well-known names and labels. To where you are now, how do you think you've progressed?
I think I've always been inspired really by my desire to serve the community. It's never, it's never shifted away from me. So from then on, as a journalist, I was in touch with the community, basically hands-on with how, how they live their lives. So I've always been inspired by that. And moving on to the public relations was an extension of that desire to serve the community, to serve Fiji really. So it's been, that's been the driving point of my life into where I am today. Yeah.
One of your biggest clients is Mrs. Mary Samasoni.
Yes, yes. I now do consultancy for Hot Bread Kitchen. I've been blessed with that opportunity because it came at the right time, just after my trial was over, and I was acquitted of the charges that I was tried with for 7 years. She gave me the opportunity to come in and be a PR consultant for Hot Bread Kitchen. And it gave me an opportunity actually to pay for the last lap of my legal studies, which is PDLP, which is quite expensive. Yes. And so apart from that, I actually am shadow writing her book.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Because your life, when I looked at it, and from what I've always observed what people in Fiji are doing, your life sometimes reads like a Shakespearean tragedy, like a play. You've had the trials and tribulations, you've had the order and supposed disorder, you've had vilification, you've had retribution, love and victory. It's a very big thing to go through, and I know that when you were at the United Nations, you were then suddenly charged, but you came out on top of that. It must have been a major inroad into what you were planning for your life.
Yeah, it was a shock. As you can imagine, at the top of my career, at 34 years of age, to be charged suddenly, you've made a name for yourself. And I had just gotten married again. And, something like that could have easily swayed me off track, absolutely. But I'm grateful that I went through it. It's not something that anyone can go through easily. And it was not easy for me, definitely. The 7 years took a toll on my life.
Yes.
But I kept reminding myself that, I can do this. I know my truth, and I need to be able to display that, not only for myself, but mostly for other people that go through the same experiences, for women in particular. Yes. I love the fact that we can be, role models as well, women, because in the kind of society we live in, we are not often seen as,
Let's talk about that some more. We're just going to go on a short break. We're talking with Sainiana Radrodro at the moment, and we'll be back to talk about this part of her life of when she was acquitted and vilified with those charges. Welcome back to On Point with Whippy-Knight and Sainiana Radrodro. We left off talking about a situation that has left a major impact in Sainiana's life when she was working for the United Nations as a communications director. Sainiana, what you went through as a 34-year-old is rather tragic. Not very many people would have been able to survive that. I don't know how I could have done it, but you had strength, you had self-belief, and you knew that you were right in what your actions were. What did it do to you as a person, as a young mother, somebody who had worked so hard to get to that position, a global role for the United Nations as the communications director?
It was quite an earth-shattering moment. The day that I was charged, the man probably will never forget for the rest of my life. I became very depressed, Ellen. The first couple of weeks, months, the public vilification, obviously, because
there were a lot of people saying unnecessary, making unnecessary statements, judging you.
Absolutely. I think it's probably got a lot to do with the fact that I was working as well for government, and I was perhaps perceived to be a political spokesperson. The role that I challenged myself, as a civil servant, but this is how Fiji is, perhaps the journey that we are all on. And so there are times like that that come in a person's life, and it was one of those for me, very challenging, especially for the children and my husband.
Yes.
I was a newly wed person as well, fairly new into my marriage. I was, in fact, I used to wonder at times why he had not walked out on me again. But I was very grateful that he was a gentleman. And my children were absolutely loving and very supportive. My whole family, in fact, were.
You had a very strong legal team behind you.
Yes.
And so, which is the most important part for you. But in that process, did your legal team believe you?
Sometimes I did not know, honestly. I like to believe that they did. Because he certainly worked hard for me. Mr. Vosarongo, Philly Vosarongo, is an amazing young man and has a very brilliant wife as well. My other co-lawyer was Mr. Aquila Nado, who is an amazing lawyer. And so I was very fortunate that these were the people that were behind me. Whether they believed in me or not, I'm not too sure, but I certainly know they really did a good work with my
But this court battle went on for 7 years.
Yes, yes.
And that 7 years must have taken some kind of toll on your personal life.
It definitely did. There are days when I barely can walk through town without having people say things in my face, behind my back.
Seriously?
Yes. And heckling me. Social media, I would get all sorts of, vilifications, the swears and the finger pointing.
So in those times, what was it that kept you going? What was it that made you hold your head up and say, I am going to win this?
First of all, I've gone through a very challenging childhood. I've always told myself, I've gone through that. I've come this far. And I know through all the journey, the amazing thing is that, I found the Lord again.
Right.
I found the Lord. And that got me through absolutely everything. And then it was peace. Towards the later years, after 3 years of my initial trial, I knew I was going to get through it. I knew whatever the journey was, whether it was as a free person or whether I would spend a few years in jail, my life was already planned out in my heart, in my mind, and with God.
Could you see, because it was 7 years of it, did you feel that there was an impact on your child?
Yes, there were so many implications on the children's lives.
On the children, sorry, yes.
Yeah, and as well as on my, my own financial well-being, mortgage sale of my vehicle, my property, my child.
Was that so you could pay for your legal fees?
No, just because I wasn't able to pay for, what I owned anymore. And I reached a point where I would ask, my husband for as much as $2 a day to get myself to school at the time. These were things that I had to go through. I've never had to ask, anyone before, to be reliant on a man. And so it was a humbling experience for me to bring myself back to that.
But you came out of that, and in all that time of that angst and pressure that you've had, and having people who didn't believe you, you still blossomed by starting to study again. I mean, how does anybody do that? How could you have concentrated on your studies knowing that you had this thing on your back?
It was one day at a time for me, Ellen, one day at a time. And I really went back to law school. It was something that I've always wanted to do. In fact, my whole entire childhood, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Did you do it because of the situation that you were in, and you wanted to understand the law a little bit more?
I needed to understand.
So it could help you with your case?
Absolutely. I needed to understand my case. I needed to understand how do we do this. And so I threw my, my heart and soul into it. Whilst I was studying, I wrote a book. I ran a tailoring shop, as you well know how I came to know you. And so these were things that were happening around me at the time. And it was necessary for me to get myself busy.
What was the book that you wrote?
Second Chance.
A Second Chance.
Yes.
Fabulous. And what was that book about?
It's actually a fictitious book. A lot of people relate it to my life. There are aspects of my life in that book, but it's actually a made-up book. I did some research with Fiji Women's Crisis Center, and it was one of the things that I took out of my experiences with them. So I wrote a book around that, and wanted to share, to women of Fiji that we can do this.
Right.
Yeah. We can talk about things like sex, and these have to be safe areas that we need to speak about.
Right.
Because we need to be able to get away from the challenges.
And did you finish your degree before the court case was over, before you won your battle?
I actually I first completed a master's, postgraduate diploma and a master's way back in 2007. And then I did a political science degree and completed that last year. And while I was doing that, I was doing a double major,
That's
political
exactly
science
right.
and law.
Political science, law, and then you did an MBA as well.
Yes. MBA I did way back in 2007. I had graduated in 2007.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So now I am about to graduate in 2 weeks' time with my law degree and graduate hopefully at the end of the year with my postgraduate professional diploma in legal practice.
That is wonderful. I mean, you know, to be in that kind of situation, and then I think, from my personal opinion, studying law was the best thing you could have done, so you could understand your case, but also it would have taken your mind off that, because law is not a very easy subject to study. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, you really deserve that, because then you came out on top. And I guess for anybody's victory, that must be the best thing that could have happened to you.